There's a switch in the avoidance brain that no one talks about, not the obvious one that responds to physical attraction or surface-level charm. This one sits deeper, buried beneath layers of defense mechanisms and childhood wounds. When it flips, when it actually activates, the avoidant doesn't just want you. They become obsessed. They can't think straight. Their carefully constructed walls crumble without them even realizing it's happening. And here's what makes this so devastating. They don't know why. They can't explain it. One day they're emotionally unavailable, convinced they don't need anyone, and the next they're lying awake at 3 a.m. consumed by thoughts of you. The triggers for this transformation aren't what you'd expect. They're not grand romantic gestures or desperate displays of affection. They're subtle psychological patterns that bypass every defense the avoidant has built. And once you understand them, you'll see why some people haunt avoidance for years, while others are forgotten in weeks. The avoidant operates from a fundamentally different emotional blueprint than most people. Their entire attachment system is wired to protect them from the vulnerability that intimacy demands. They've spent years, sometimes decades, perfecting the art of not needing anyone. Their independence isn't just a preference, it's a fortress. Every brick in that fortress was laid during moments when they learned that closeness equals pain, that needing someone leads to disappointment, that emotional expression results in rejection or abandonment, so they shut it all down. They built walls so high that even they forgot what they were protecting. But here's the paradox that defines the avoidant experience. The same mechanisms that protect them from hurt also starve them of connection. Deep down, beneath all the deactivation strategies and dismissive narratives, the avoidant craves intimacy just as much as anyone else. Their attachment system didn't disappear. It went underground. It learned to whisper instead of scream, to hint instead of demand. And when certain psychological patterns emerge, patterns that speak directly to their buried needs without triggering their defenses, something extraordinary happens. The avoidant doesn't just feel attraction. They feel compulsion. An almost magnetic pull towards someone that contradicts everything they've told themselves about who they are and what they want. These psychological turn-ons aren't manipulation tactics or games to play. They're authentic expressions of specific qualities that the avoidance nervous system recognizes as safe, rare, and impossibly valuable. When an avoidant encounters these patterns, their brain lights up in ways that physical attraction alone could never achieve. Because these patterns promise something the avoidant has been searching for their entire life without even knowing it, the possibility of connection without engulfment, intimacy without loss of self, love without the terror that usually accompanies it, emotional self-sufficiency. Nothing captivates an avoidant more powerfully than someone who genuinely doesn't need them. Not someone playing hard to get, not someone pretending to be busy, but someone whose life is so full, so rich, so complete, that the avoidant's presence adds to it, rather than completes it. This psychological turn-on strikes at the very core of the avoidant's deepest fear, being needed. When they encounter someone who wants them but doesn't need them, who enjoys their company but doesn't require their validation, who appreciates their presence but doesn't fall apart in their absence, something in their nervous system relaxes. The pressure disappears, the threat of engulfment evaporates, and suddenly, paradoxically, they want to get closer. The avoidant has spent their entire life running from neediness. Every time someone has clung to them, every time someone has made them responsible for their emotional well-being, every time someone has treated them as essential to their happiness, the avoidance alarm bells have gone off. Their system interprets dependency as danger. It tells them that this person will consume them, suffocate them, demand more than they can give. So they pull away, they create distance, they protect themselves from the perceived threat of being someone's entire world. But when they meet someone who is emotionally self-sufficient, the entire dynamic shifts. This person has their own friends, their own hobbies, their own sources of joy and fulfillment. They don't text constantly demanding attention. They don't spiral into anxiety when plans change. They don't need reassurance every few hours. They live a full life that the avoidant gets invited into rather than being expected to construct. This creates a sensation the avoidant rarely experiences: safety. The safety to get close without the fear of being swallowed whole. the safety to care without the terror of being made responsible for another person's entire emotional landscape. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that it allows the avoidant to pursue rather than be pursued. For once, they're not the one being chased. They're not the object of someone's desperate need. Instead, they find themselves wanting more time, more attention, more connection from someone who is perfectly content with or without it. This reversal triggers something primal in the avoidant. They become the pursuer. They start reaching out more. They initiate plans. They think about this person constantly, wondering what they're doing, who they're with, why they seem so unaffected by the avoidant's presence or absence. The emotional self-sufficiency creates a scarcity dynamic that the avoidant has never experienced from the other side. Usually, they're the scarce resource. They're the ones rationing attention and affection. But now they've encountered someone whose attention and affection aren't guaranteed, aren't desperately offered, aren't constantly available. This person has boundaries. This person has a life. This person exists completely independently of the avoidant's validation or approval. And the avoidant finds this absolutely magnetic. This turn-on goes deeper than simple reverse psychology. It touches something fundamental in the avoidant's psyche, the buried longing to be chosen rather than needed. The avoidant has been needed before. People have needed them to feel worthy, to feel loved, to feel complete. And every time it felt like a burden, a trap, a role they never auditioned for. But being chosen, being wanted by someone who would be fine without them, that feels like genuine desire rather than desperate dependency. It feels like they matter because of who they are, not because they're filling a void in someone else's life. The emotionally self-sufficient person also demonstrates something the avoidant deeply respects: the ability to regulate their own nervous system. The avoidant knows how hard they work to maintain their emotional equilibrium. They know the effort it takes to not need external validation, to not require constant connection, to self-soothe and self-regulate. When they encounter someone else who possesses these same skills, they recognize a kindred spirit. Someone who won't dump their unprocessed emotions onto them. Someone who won't make the avoidant responsible for managing feelings that person should be managing themselves. Someone who understands that each person is responsible for their own inner world. This recognition creates a sense of possibility that the avoidant rarely feels. Maybe, with this person, they could have connection without the claustrophobia. Maybe they could have intimacy without the suffocation. Maybe they could love someone without losing themselves in the process. These maybes are intoxicating to the avoidant precisely because they address their core wound. The wound that says love means losing yourself, that intimacy means annihilation, that needing someone means weakness. But here's a person who proves that none of those equations have to be true. Unpredictable unavailability. The avoidant is used to being the unpredictable one. They're used to being the person who sometimes responds immediately and sometimes disappears for days. They're used to controlling the distance and the closeness, the rhythm of connection and disconnection. But when they encounter someone whose availability is genuinely unpredictable, whose attention they can't count on, whose presence isn't guaranteed, something in their psychology activates. The chase mechanism that usually lies dormant suddenly awakens. They find themselves checking their phone more often. They find themselves disappointed when this person can't make plans. They find themselves actually missing someone, an emotion they've spent their life avoiding. This psychological turn-on works because it disrupts the avoidant's sense of control. Control is everything to the avoidant. It's how they manage their anxiety around intimacy. If they control the distance, they control their safety. If they dictate the pace of the relationship, they dictate the level of vulnerability required. But when someone else is unpredictably unavailable, the avoidant loses that control. They can't regulate the relationship the way they usually do because the other person isn't consistently there to be regulated. This creates an anxiety that the avoidant isn't accustomed to experiencing, the anxiety of potentially losing access to something they value. The unpredictability is key. It can't be consistent unavailability, which the avoidant would simply interpret as disinterest and move on from. It has to be genuinely unpredictable. Sometimes this person is available, warm, engaged, fully present. Other times they're busy, distracted, unavailable for legitimate reasons. The avoidant never quite knows which version they're going to get. This keeps their nervous system engaged in a way that consistency never could. Consistency feels safe, and safety allows the avoidant to take the connection for granted. Unpredictability creates just enough uncertainty to keep them invested, keep them wondering, keep them trying. What makes this so psychologically powerful is that it mirrors the avoidant's own behavior back at them. For the first time, they're experiencing what it feels like to be on the other side of inconsistency. They're the ones waiting for a response that might not come. They're the ones wondering if they did something wrong when someone needs space. They're the ones feeling the sting of plans being cancelled or rescheduled. This doesn't make them angry or resentful. It makes them more interested, because the avoidant respects people who operate from the same playbook they do. People who value their independence. People who don't rearrange their entire life for a relationship. People who have priorities beyond romantic connection. The unavailability also prevents the avoidant from becoming complacent. Complacency is the death of attraction for the avoidant. When someone is always available, always eager, always waiting for them, the avoidant's interest wanes. There's no challenge. There's no mystery. There's nothing to pursue. But when someone is unpredictably unavailable, when their time and attention have to be earned rather than assumed, the avoidant stays engaged. They work harder. They show up more consistently. They actually try to maintain the connection because they're not confident it will be there if they don't. This dynamic taps into the avoidant's competitive nature. Not competitive in an aggressive sense, but competitive in the sense that they want to be the priority. When someone is unavailable because they have other priorities, the avoidant finds themselves wanting to become one of those priorities. They want to be important enough to make the cut. They want to be valued enough that this person chooses to spend their limited time with them. This is completely opposite to how they usually function. Usually they're running from being someone's priority. But when the priority status has to be earned from someone who clearly has other valuable things in their life, suddenly it becomes desirable. The unpredictable unavailability also creates space, and space is oxygen for the avoidant. When someone isn't constantly in their face demanding attention, the avoidant can actually miss them. Missing someone requires absence. It requires not knowing when you'll next connect. It requires wondering what that person is doing, who they're with, what they're thinking. The avoidant so rarely experiences genuine longing because people are usually too available, too present, too eager. But with unpredictable unavailability, longing has room to develop. And longing is one of the most powerful emotions the avoidant can feel. It bypasses their defenses because it emerges from within rather than being imposed from without. Emotional indifference to their withdrawal. When the avoidant pulls away, they expect a specific reaction. They expect pursuit. They expect anxiety. They expect questions and concerns and attempts to pull them back. This expected reaction actually reinforces their withdrawal because it confirms their narrative. People are clingy, relationships are suffocating, closeness always comes with demands. But when they encounter someone who responds to their withdrawal with complete emotional indifference, their entire psychological framework gets disrupted. This person doesn't chase, doesn't question, doesn't panic, just allows the space without making it mean anything catastrophic. And this response hits the avoidant harder than any amount of pursuit ever could. The emotional indifference communicates something radical to the avoidant. This person doesn't need them to feel okay. When the avoidant withdraws and the other person simply continues living their life, happy and fulfilled and unbothered, it shatters the avoidant's unconscious belief that their presence is essential to others' well-being. This should be relieving. The avoidant claims they don't want to be needed, but when faced with proof that they're genuinely not needed, something unexpected happens. They feel insignificant. They wonder if they matter at all. They start to question whether this person even cares about the connection. This questioning is deeply uncomfortable for the avoidant because it forces them to confront their own attachment. If this person is indifferent to their absence, maybe they should just stay away permanently. But they don't want to. They realize they care about the connection more than they thought. They realize they value this person's presence in their life. They realize that the withdrawal was a test they expected the other person to fail, and the pass feels more threatening than failure would have, because failure would have confirmed their worldview. Passing challenges it completely. The emotional indifference also removes the reward the avoidant usually gets from withdrawal. Typically, when they pull away, they get to feel their importance confirmed by the other person's distress. They get to see that they matter, that their absence affects someone, that they have impact and value. It's a twisted form of validation, but it's validation nonetheless. When someone responds to their withdrawal with indifference, that validation evaporates. The avoidant doesn't get to feel important through their absence. They don't get to see themselves reflected in someone else's anxiety. They're just alone with their choice, and it feels hollow. This hollowness creates a crisis point for the avoidant. They withdrew to protect themselves, to create the space they claim they need, to avoid the suffocation they fear. But instead of relief, they feel nothing. Or worse, they feel loss. The person they pulled away from is fine without them, living fully, happily, completely unaffected by the avoidant's distance. This creates a scarcity panic that the avoidant rarely experiences. Maybe they're not as important to this person as they thought. Maybe this person won't be there if they decide to come back. Maybe they've actually lost something valuable through their automatic protective patterns. The psychological power of this turn-on lies in how it forces the avoidant to be the one who cares more, who pursues, who worries about the connection. Every relationship paradigm they're comfortable with gets inverted. They're not the distant one anymore because the other person is equally distant, equally unbothered, equally fine with space. The avoidant finds themselves in the unfamiliar position of wanting reassurance, wanting to know they matter, wanting some sign that their absence affected this person. These wants feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, but they also feel real in a way the avoidant's usual emotional numbness never does. The indifference also demonstrates strength that the avoidant respects deeply. It shows that this person won't beg, won't plead, won't compromise their dignity for connection. The avoidant has witnessed so many people abandon their self-respect in pursuit of relationship. They've seen people tolerate mistreatment, accept breadcrumbs, degrade themselves for scraps of attention. It disgusts them, not because they're cruel, but because it triggers their own fear of becoming that desperate. But someone who maintains complete composure when the avoidant withdraws, who doesn't chase or collapse or panic, demonstrates a level of self-possession that the avoidant finds irresistible. This turn-on forces growth in the avoidant whether they want it or not. They have to examine why this person's indifference bothers them. They have to confront the reality that they actually care about this connection. They have to acknowledge that their withdrawal wasn't really about needing space. It was about testing, about seeing if this person would chase, about confirming their importance. And when the test yields unexpected results, when the indifference meets them with equal energy, they have to decide. Do they walk away and prove they don't actually care, or do they come back and admit that they do? Either choice requires honesty with themselves that the avoidant usually avoids. And that honesty, uncomfortable as it is, cracks open the possibility for real intimacy. Mysterious depth. The avoidant is perpetually bored by people who reveal everything immediately. Surface-level conversations, predictable responses, open book personalities, these do nothing for them. But when they encounter someone with layers, someone who reveals themselves slowly, someone who has depths they can't immediately access or understand, the avoidant becomes fascinated. This mysterious depth creates an intellectual and emotional challenge that bypasses the avoidant's usual defenses. They're not being asked to be vulnerable. They're being invited to discover. And discovery is something the avoidant can engage with because it doesn't feel like emotional demand. The mysterious depth manifests in multiple ways. It's the person who has experiences they don't immediately share. It's the person who has thoughts and perspectives that surprise the avoidant every time they talk. It's the person who has a rich inner world that they only reveal in carefully chosen moments. The avoidant finds themselves wanting to know more, wanting to understand, wanting to peel back the layers and discover what lies beneath. This wanting is completely different from being needed. It's curiosity rather than obligation. It's pull rather than push. What makes this so psychologically compelling for the avoidant is that it engages their mind before their heart. The avoidant is much more comfortable operating from an intellectual space than an emotional one. When someone presents as a puzzle to solve, a mystery to unravel, the avoidant can approach connection through curiosity rather than vulnerability. They can ask questions because they're interested, not because they're trying to be emotionally intimate. They can spend time together because they want to understand this fascinating person, not because they're trying to build a relationship. The intimacy sneaks up on them while they're focused on the mystery. The mysterious depth also ensures the avoidant never feels like they completely understand or can predict this person. Predictability kills attraction for the avoidant. When they can anticipate someone's responses, when they know exactly how someone will react, when there are no surprises left, their interest evaporates. But someone who maintains mysterious depth, who always has another layer to reveal, who continues surprising them months or years into knowing them, holds the avoidant's attention in ways that emotional availability never could. This quality also communicates something vital to the avoidant. This person has a self that exists independently of the relationship. They're not molding themselves to fit what the avoidant wants. They're not revealing everything in a desperate attempt to create intimacy. They're maintaining their own mystery, their own privacy, their own internal world that the avoidant only gets glimpses of. This preservation of self is deeply attractive to the avoidant because it mirrors their own need to maintain separateness, even within connection. The mysterious depth creates a dynamic where the avoidant is always slightly unsure where they stand, not in an anxiety-inducing way, but in an intrigue-maintaining way. They never quite know what this person thinks of them. They never quite know if they're as important to this person as this person is becoming to them. They never quite know what's happening beneath the surface. This uncertainty keeps them engaged, keeps them thinking, keeps them invested in a way that certainty never would. Authentic disinterest in changing them. Every avoidant has experienced the pattern. At first, someone accepts them as they are, but slowly, subtly, the attempts to change them begin. The suggestions that they should be more communicative, the hints that they should be more available, the requests for more emotional expression, the disappointment when they need space, the wounded reactions to their natural rhythms, and every one of these attempts confirms the avoidant's deepest belief: people don't actually accept them, people want a different version of them, people are trying to fix something that the avoidant doesn't believe is broken. But when the avoidant encounters someone who demonstrates authentic disinterest in changing them, someone who genuinely accepts their need for space, their communication style, their emotional rhythms, something profound happens. The defenses that are usually up constantly can lower slightly. The avoidant doesn't have to brace for criticism or demands for change. They can exist as they are without constantly managing someone else's disappointment or frustration. This acceptance feels like water in a desert they didn't even know they were wandering through. The authentic disinterest in changing them is different from passive acceptance or resignation. It's not someone tolerating their avoidance while secretly hoping they'll change. It's someone who genuinely doesn't see their attachment style as a problem to fix. Someone who respects their need for autonomy. Someone who understands that the avoidance way of connecting is different, not deficient. Someone who doesn't take their space needs personally. Someone who doesn't interpret their emotional guardedness as rejection. This acceptance is psychologically powerful because it removes the pressure that usually makes the avoidant run. When there's no agenda to change them, no underlying expectation that they'll eventually become more emotionally available, more communicative, more traditionally intimate, the avoidant can breathe. They can show up as they actually are, rather than as who they think they should be. And paradoxically, this acceptance often creates the safety necessary for the avoidant to actually grow and change, not because they have to, but because they want to. The person who authentically doesn't need them to change also demonstrates wisdom that the avoidant respects. This person understands that you can't change another human being. This person knows that acceptance is the only foundation for genuine connection. This person has clearly done their own work to reach a place where they're not trying to get their needs met by molding someone else into their ideal partner. This maturity is attractive to the avoidant because it suggests this person won't become demanding or controlling as the relationship deepens. This turn-on also addresses the avoidant's core shame. Deep down, many avoidants carry shame about their attachment style. They've been told they're cold, unavailable, broken, They've been blamed for relationship failures. They've internalized messages that something is fundamentally wrong with them. When someone comes along who doesn't echo those messages, who doesn't see them as damaged or deficient, who accepts their way of being as valid and workable, it heals something in the avoidant they didn't even know was wounded. The authentic disinterest in changing them creates a paradox. When the avoidant feels completely accepted as they are, they often become more willing to be vulnerable, more available, more emotionally open. Not because they're being pressured to change, but because the acceptance creates safety. And safety is what the avoidant has been seeking all along, even as they've been running from the very intimacy that could provide it. When someone demonstrates that they can be loved without being fixed, without being improved, without being transformed into someone else entirely, the avoidant catches a glimpse of what secure attachment might feel like. And that glimpse becomes something they can't stop thinking about, can't stop wanting, can't stop moving toward, even as every old pattern tells them to run away.